Right. So that voice means we're ready to go. It is episode 11 of GenGMs. Welcome, everyone. And episode 11, of course, for those of you who are not watching the shorts, this is the episode 11 of the long videos. If you are watching the shorts, then who knows what episode this is because we have lots of short videos out. But
Yeah.
we're here. And that's Zach over there.
Yes. And this is Greg over
Yeah,
there.
there we go.
Okay.
Now it
Yeah.
all works. Yeah, I was talking about the fact it was just we're recording this on December 30th, and I was like, oh yeah, so I'm wearing my sweater that I got for Christmas, and you're wearing yours, and he was like, no, it's a poncho.
Yeah.
I'm like, of
This is
course,
a poncho.
California, it's a
Yeah.
poncho naturally. Oh, I don't think I saw the what's the
It's
face on
a
it?
it's a wolf. It's a
Oh, it's a wolf poncho.
yeah.
Oh, nice.
Really, really nice.
That's
Like
pretty
a
slick.
wool inside. It keeps you warm, but it's also not like wearing a full sweatshirt either. It's perfect. I've never had a poncho before, and I feel like I found my clothing.
You're a poncho guy. That's
I'm a
good.
poncho guy.
That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah, so we're here, and this is our final recording of 2024.
hmm
And it is hard to believe that we started this little venture not that long ago, but we're moving
Yeah.
into year two of the second full set of recording of this. So,
Wow.
yeah, I don't know. Do we have
Yeah.
anything impressive to say about like, our what all that means definitionally and like all the
No, I just think it's cool that you and I are using this as a way to connect with other D&D and tabletop community people, and
totally.
for us also to learn more about our GMing styles and get tips and improve our craft and have some fun. So no, it's been great, and hopefully what I don't know how many subscribers we have as of recording this right now.
I need to go
Is
look.
it
It's not
like
quite 100 yet. We're closing
it's
in.
like yeah, almost 100. So hopefully by the end of 2025 we'll have 100
Oh,
subscribers.
well, I really hope that's the case. Yes.
Yeah. But then yeah, the anyone who's here now, you're the OGs. You have the pleasure and the privilege of being here at the very start of something grand and great that's going to
That's
have
right.
thousands and thousands of viewers
That's right.
someday.
That's what we hope. And remember, you can if you should be watching us via the YouTube, or possibly you could be finding us through some other source, TikTok or something like that. But if you find it, or YouTube Shorts, but please do subscribe to us over on Gen GMs. It's free for you to do that, but it definitely helps us out. And when we get to, I think we said 500 subscribers is when Zach is going to
Oh
start
yeah.
explaining about the glasses, and
Yeah.
I know that's hugely important. So
This is hugely important, and
yeah.
I mean, honestly, even more hugely important because these glasses were apparently featured in the new Wicked movie, which
Oh,
I have
really? I
not
didn't know
heard
that. I haven't seen
be.
it yet.
Oh yeah, no, I haven't seen it either. But I mean, this has been for those that have seen the trailer of the Wicked movie, which was out for months at this time. This is no news because apparently she does not wear them the whole movie. I don't think because I've seen many clips of her without these glasses.
Hmm.
But at least at some point, Elphaba, or the green one, I don't remember. I
That's
think
right.
that's
That's right.
Elphaba.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
Wears these exact same style frames, although they're black instead of gold.
Wow.
And so all I've been getting when I've passerby on the street or the people at the library when I go into San Francisco are like, "Oh, you have the Wizard of Oz glasses," and I'm like, "No, no, no,
No,
no,
no, no,
no!
no.
I
Let's get
had
the
them
trend
first."
setting right, please.
Yes,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
copied me, and I copied a random person I saw on TikTok and who I asked, "Where did you get the glasses from?"
Yeah.
But yeah, so if you want the glasses from Wicked, I will tell you at 500 subscribers. This is true.
Awesome. That's it. That's a goal. That's a goal worth pursuing. So,
Yes.
um, but yeah. So thank you all those who have been with us for 2024, and happy New Year
Yeah.
from us. And let's get into it, Zach. What do you got? I
hmm
think you're up first with a question.
Yeah. So I have first question for you, and this one I think is good for the end of the year. It may You may need to think on it a little bit. I don't know how quickly you'll
Okay.
be able to parse through your memory banks,
Okay.
but
I'm ready.
it's currently December 30th,
Yep.
2024. So,
Mhm.
tomorrow's the last day of the year. And so this question is, what are some of your favorite moments of this year in your actual plays that you've run on your channel?
Ooh.
Because for those that don't know, is essentially your main D&D kind of your main D&D thing? Like as far as how often and how much you play D&D, I imagine it's on the Arvin Eleron channel that you run.
Largely, although I am doing Hearthglow with you, which
Yeah.
is recorded with you and Carlos and Claire,
Oh
etc.
yeah.
But but
And then
yes,
that, well,
most
that's technically adjacently somewhat also associated
somewhat.
with
That's
Arvin.
true. That's
Yeah.
true. But it's not live streamed. But yes, no, that's mostly
Yeah.
you're mostly right. There's little mini things here and there. Like I'm running a little mini campaign with my family. But yeah, for the
Oh
most
yeah.
part, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I
Yeah.
suppose even including things, or perhaps especially including things that people haven't seen, but yeah, on any of your on any of the shows or things that you've run, if any moments stand out to you, that's why I said like it's one of those things where you ask this and you're like, well, gosh, I have to parse through all of
Yeah.
2024 to think about, but yeah,
Yeah, that's a good question.
or I guess to round it out, like, do you feel like you have learned anything or changed anything about your GMing style this year? Like if you had to do a review of this year in tabletop for you, I guess is broadly my question.
So okay, so I think that's kind of like a two-parter in a way.
Hmm.
So let me I would say I'll talk about what I learned last. As far as like the session that I think or the sessions that kind of were highlights for me. Um, there were a few of them. So one of the things that I'll mention actually is not mine at all. And it is a session that took place on my channel during my charity event. For those of you who don't know, I run on my channel once a year something called ArvCon, which has been over 10 years now, and it is to raise money for the Damon Runyon Cancer Research Foundation. We have raised over $30,000 to date, which I'm very proud of, and we run it, and it's a bunch of like tabletop events and stuff like that. So what we did this time was we ended up having a session with scientists from Damon Runyon. We've done this the last few years, running through a tabletop thing, and it turned out to be the old West End edition of Star Wars, like 1987 or 88 or whatever the heck it was, West End edition of Star Wars tabletop role playing with three scientists playing it. And it was an absolute, and John Helfers, who Zach knows a little bit, was the GM. It was an absolute delight to watch. And I think the reason that I enjoyed it so much, watching it and producing it, in essence, on my channel was number one. So these are one of the people had some, GM, or had some tabletop role playing experience, one of the players. And the other one had a little bit, but more on the video game side. And the other one was like interested, but didn't have a lot of experience in that per se. But they worked really well together. And it was just kind of, it was a classic like escape from the Star Destroyer, type of thing. But but the characters were so interestingly put together that the whole thing became this really funny kind of exploration of Star Wars on the kind of the lower decks kind of vibe, right? If that
Hmm.
sort of thing,
Hmm.
Star Trek lower decks, like that kind of vibe,
Yeah.
because like one of the one of the characters is like this droid that's like a union rep basically, so everything is about like union organization and all this stuff, and about like constantly giving people information about we must wither away the means of production and all this like Marx quotes. And like at one at one point there's this like set of like droids that are like charging them, like because they're trying to get off the ship, and they're like charging at the three players characters. And like so the one character is just like we must unite or die, my brothers, like as it's facing the characters. It was absolutely hysterical. It was so funny, and it was a reminder about how delightfully fun
Mm.
tabletop role play can be. Like we talk a lot about how it's important to have fun and joke around, but it's also important to really understand the serious drama and really make sure the characters have the arc the players are hoping for, and give them stakes and all that, and agency for the players. Like we talk about that all the time, and I do think that the sort of serious poignant moments are really important. But I have to say that watching this just sort of sheer joy of these players who don't know each other very well, other than they're just common scientists, who receive fellowships from this organization, just
Hmm.
having an absolute blast. And John being a good enough GM to kind of just, flow with it was absolutely great. It was so much fun. And it was so much fun that, in fact, there is going to be a semi-permanent, at least a longer campaign featuring those three players and GM
Wow.
that's going to be launching in the new year. I wanted to start it earlier, but I'm here to tell you that scheduling three cancer research scientists is not easy to get this
I
going. But
wonder
they're going to
why.
be doing it with John Helfer starting in the new year. So that
Wow.
was one that was really a delight. One that I did that would stand out for me. I mean, there were so many. Like,
Hmm.
there were great moments in Expedition from the Mysterious Peaks that you play in that I really love.
Hmm.
There were so many great moments from my by the Dice Roll campaign and so on. And I was thinking of the Eberron campaign, which is now up to like almost level 15, where
Wow.
there was this one big moment of one of Tren's characters basically being in this area called the Gray, the Mournland, where all magic is sort of warped and distorted, and having a kind of sort of a flashback to a thing that he never actually saw, but it was the destruction of the
Yeah.
of his home where he
I feel
lived.
like you talked about this.
Oh
Yeah.
man, it was very, very powerful. So that really stood up there. But the
Mm.
one that I would have to cite most of all is the live event that took place, and there were two of them. One, we had a live event for at the Klein.
Hmm.
That involved both all of us, including you, doing
Yeah.
stuff with Hearthglow. That was amazing.
Oh yeah.
And that happened this year. I mean, it
Hmm.
happened early this year, but it happened. That was great. But the one that I would really cite was the live event that I did in England,
Yeah.
in London for the By the Dice Roll crew. That was just super special. I mean, it was first of all, it was in London, in a theater in London. It wasn't like the Globe, but still, I mean, like it was in a theater in London. It was in front of a enthusiastic audience of people, many of whom were people that were viewers on my channel that I had never met. I had never met any of the players in person. So it was a very
Mm.
strange experience because I was simultaneously very familiar with all of them because we've been playing
Yeah.
together for many years. And at the same time, had never met any of them face to face. So getting the chance to do that, having my family in the audience watching while it was going on. That was just really special. It was fun. There were moments of poignancy. We were running the first part of Hearthglow, which of Forbidden Library, which you were very familiar with, of course, yourself.
Yeah.
But that crew had never run through it before. It was just great. And so that will always be special to me. Like the first Klein with you,
Hmm.
ones like that will sort of stand out. But that was so special for me, and it reminded me that as much as I do love streaming, and it's made D&D as a regular part of my life possible, because otherwise gathering people together in person to do this all the time would be very difficult. So there's so many things that I love about it. But the live energy of a room, like having, and it was recorded and it was like broadcast on Twitch, so you can see it on Twitch as well. And so chat did get a chance to weigh in, and that was cool. But getting that in person,
Yeah.
small theater vibe,
The real thing.
with like the whole thing, that was just
Yeah.
amazing. It was really, really cool. So that really, I think, was the highlight for me.
Yeah.
That trip in general was one of the best trips I've ever had. It was just great. So yeah.
How many did you have in the audience for that? Was it a
I
small
don't remember
crowd?
the exact number. It was probably similar to what we had at the Klein this time,
Hmm.
except the difference is the theater is like 1/6 or seventh the
Right.
size.
Okay.
So, when you've got 75 people-ish or whatever it was, 50 to 75 at the
Hmm.
Klein, that's a theater that seats 1,500. So
Hmm.
that's, but having that same number in a theater that seats, 150 or
Wow.
something is a lot different. So it was cool. It was not packed to the gills. It wasn't,
Hmm.
that was all going to be based on the players, and many of the players themselves they were all from Europe. Most of them are from Europe, but well, one was from Canada. Most of them were from Europe, but they were only a few of them were from the UK. We had one who was from Germany and stuff, and there were a couple there were, I guess, two of them, or one of them was from Wales. Two
Mm.
of them were from England. So it was just different, places, and then the one from Canada. So
Hmm.
that like they were scattered in terms of where they were from, so we weren't going to have like this massive turnout, but we did have people there to watch, and that was great. So that was very special to me, and it made me think, like, I love doing those
Yeah.
live events, and I'd like to do
Yeah.
more of them, and there may be even more coming up soon, he said, that you'll want to
Yes.
be tuning in for. But it was really cool. I really liked it a lot. So
That's great.
those would be my standouts, I would say.
Great. And
Which means I should ask you what your highlight
yeah,
was for that.
sure. So I think two things come to mind. I mean, I'll mention the small stuff, which made, certainly not small thinking of it, but every week or so, aside from summer and winter break, I've been volunteering at my local high school,
Mhm.
helping to run that club. I have same with the middle school as well. Of course, I have my San Francisco program, working with the librarians at the San
Yep.
Francisco Public Library main
Yep.
branch, and just did that yesterday as well. So that program's been going great. But as far as like favorite moments of D&D this year, um, I would have to say, aside from, I think going out to Connecticut, performing at the Klein, it has become now like a yearly thing that I look forward to.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
exciting.
No joke.
And it's always a pleasure to come and visit you and the family and to be out there. I've thought more and more about it, and as I walk around my neighborhood, our neighborhoods are strikingly similar, like both by water, both have sort of like small like kind of cafe areas near
Yep.
them. Um Still sort of in nice sort of almost foresty areas that are not entirely urban
Right.
but also
Right.
kind of suburban, so but yeah, so I've always I miss Connecticut and coming out there. I can't wait to do it again next year for ArvCon or anything else that may be happening. But aside from all that, and then of course Expedition from the Mysterious Peaks, and then I'm probably forgetting a few other things. But aside from all of that, I would have to say the two biggest things for me that kind of stand out. One is of something that has been mentioned on GenGMs before, which that was that I did get to play test
Yeah.
Daggerheart with
I
Critical Role
assumed that
earlier
was going
this
to be a big
year.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I do have more Critical Role news, but that will have to remain until it can be fully announced. But aside from that, yeah, just the opportunity to go there and, back in, I only started playing D&D back in 2016 after watching Matt Mercer DM for Vin Diesel on DN Diesel, the YouTube video.
That's right. That's right.
And then I was like, huh, what's Critical Role? And then, binge watching 100 episodes later, I was like, man, this D&D is going to be my thing.
That's it.
So to go from that, and then almost 10 years later, now getting to play test material and to give some feedback as a game master for Daggerheart with the people who got me into tabletop was just absolutely amazing and incredibly humbling in a strange way, and also fun. And it was great. It was amazing. So when I can talk more at length, maybe I'll do that on my own channel someday about that full trip and things like that. But part of it was, that it was a private play test, so I can't talk too much about it. But I did get to play with Critical Role, so of course that's got to be a highlight of D&D of the year for me.
Yeah.
And it certainly was. It was an amazing, great time. I got to play with every member of the cast aside from Laura Bailey, and yeah, I got to DM, or I guess GM, Daggerheart for, I believe, Taliesin, Marisha, and Liam, and then I DM'd D&D for Travis and Sam, and then played Daggerheart with Matt Mercer and Ashley Johnson. So yeah, it was
I
an
have to talk
amazing
to you
time.
sometime about the Travis Sam DMing because I'll bet that was a ton of fun.
Well, what happened? It was funny because I prepared um, something about my GMing styles. I have this habit of like once I heard that they were going to be my D&D players,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, Travis and Sam, I got to put together something kind of slapstick, something for them to like really kind of be wacky, because
Yeah.
that's that, especially the dynamic of the two of them, especially Sam. So I prepared this whole, long story short, I prepared this whole kobold one shot
Okay.
for them to play kobolds. But surprisingly, like Travis, of course, like fell into the leaderly role, and then Sam's character was sort of goofy, but they were like playing it very close to the chest. And so part of me, in the moment, I was like, okay, I got to run what I've got to run. But
Right.
I was almost like, come on, guys, I was expecting crazy characters
Where's
and
the more
wacky
slapstick?
decisions. Yeah, yeah. but I realized part of it too is like, it was a play test, not only well, specifically that D&D game was a play test of me. And then also there were two other guest players. So I
Hmm.
was talking to my brother the other day about this as we were reminiscing, and he was like, maybe it was because they, they can't really take center stage when there are two other guest players, just like you as a guest DM, who they need to get to know and kind of
Right,
suss out.
right.
And I was like, oh, that makes sense why they were playing a little closer to the chest. So anyway, yeah, it was a very fun time. And so yeah, wonderful, amazing experience. The fact that they've built a whole studio out of D&D and the sort of subsidiaries that they now have, like Darrington Press and Meta Pigeon and their animated series, and yeah, it's amazing, showing what's possible in the tabletop space. So that was really cool. The other thing that stands out for me this year, I guess, kind of that is more meaningful. I mean, I've had a lot of random gigs this year. Some in person in San Francisco that I, would drive out to, and I bring all my physical miniatures and things,
Hmm.
and then some virtually. But I would say the other highlight of this year, the last highlight of this year, was I had a random cold call email to my website and my work email of like, hey, I live in San Francisco. It was a parent who lives in San Francisco and has his daughter and his daughter's group of friends all want to play D&D and they've never really played before. Can he hire me to come to their place and run D&D? And I was like, perfect. That's exactly what I do. Let's do it. So drove into the city, into San Francisco, and ran D&D for them. And essentially, these kids all go to the same private school together in the Bay Area. And because of that, these kids are all friends, and now their parents are all kind of friends,
Right. Hmm.
as because they frequent each other so much.
Yep.
And so they had a blast and kept asking to continue the D&D because a lot of times, people hire me
The
for a
parents or the
one-off
kids?
time, a bit of both, honestly,
Okay.
mostly the kids, but
Okay.
um the a lot of the time people will hire me for a birthday or just a one shot and then that's it, one and done. But the kids kept asking to continue playing, and the funny thing was is like they came up with this idea of like, okay, what if we host the D&D at a different kid's house every time? And so this year I think I've done 7 sessions, but there were 5 kids in the friend group, and at a certain point I had gone in order to all 5 of the kids' houses throughout the Bay Area. And all their different parents hosted, and it was just so interesting and very cool too. Like I'm getting to know them a little bit better, getting to DM them more consistently. And that was sort of the first thing that I've had like this, where normally I only have like single one-off one shots in person, but now this is almost becoming a campaign, somewhat monthly or like every 2 months, depending on when we can schedule it. But I've seen them several times this year, so um, yeah, we've had a very very fun time. The kids are very quirky, but are very quickly picking up the rules. I mean, they're around 10 years old, each
I
of
was
them.
going to ask
So
what the age was. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So but it's great, and I'm getting to know the parents a little more as well. Like one of them is really really into American mahjong and runs mahjong, and like so we after the gig was done, she and I were like talking about mahjong as the kids were packing up. So yeah, it was just I think that was a sweet thing that I kind of look back on this year that I really enjoyed is like the recurring clientele of that. And I had a recurring campaign through this year of like I've been running this Strixhaven campaign for over 70 sessions now. That campaign's coming to a close. We're going to start a new one next year, and that's been great. That was a weekly Monday campaign that I've been running privately, but just virtually as well. But yeah, the getting hired to just do this one off like kids thing,
That's
and
cool.
then going to the next kid's house and then the next kid's house and then
Yeah.
continuing the story with them and them continuing to iterate on their characters. It's been really cool to see, because often it's like you sit down, it's like, okay, I'm going to help you make characters really quickly. I give them the pre-gen sheets, we just go through 4 hours and then it's done. But they're like,
Yeah.
no, we want to work on these. So knowing too that these are kind of becoming their foundational memories of tabletop, and their first D&D characters and stuff like that makes it
Yeah.
really important to me and
Yeah.
really meaningful. So yeah, I'm hopeful that I will continue to run D&D for them in the next year, and continue fostering a great relationship with the parents and the kids. And yeah, I would say that was one of the I mean, and talk about a job you enjoy. Like to be, in some
Sure.
situations, again, like if we didn't live in a capitalistic economy, in some situations, I would pay money to run D&D for my friends or for groups of kids or things
Yeah.
like that. Like I
Yeah.
just enjoy so much. So yeah, those were big D&D moments for me. One critical role, the other just a group of kids having a great time and
And that's I also
pouring
think
around.
that's it feels to me like that's kind of I love that story. I think that's also kind of opposite ends of the spectrum that reflect a little bit about what this hobby, profession, commitment, life path
Hmm.
that we've chosen has, right? Which is where Critical Role, that is the sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the room, right? It's the thing that everybody knows. It's the huge
Hmm.
mega sort of, it is the definition in a way of what we think of in some ways with Dungeons and Dragons,
Hmm.
especially if you're of a certain age, if you're of a certain kind of generation, let's say, right?
Yeah.
That you had that experience of like connecting with those people in this amazing way.
Yeah.
And then you had the experience of sort of kids playing D&D for the first time
Yeah.
and just loving it, right? And that's the age too, right? I mean, it's somewhere between the ages of like 10 and 16 is in that
Yeah.
6 year gap or so.
Hmm.
That's, I mean, I picked up, what did I say? Sixth grade, right? So we're talking like 84, 85, and I was about 12, 13, and I'm playing D&D for the first time. And then, and all that. And we've talked about that before, that those formative experiences stay with you. And yeah, it's something which stays with you, I think, because if assuming that you have a good experience, and I do know people that had a bad D&D experience, and generally my feeling is that tends to be when the DM doesn't know what they're doing, and like, so a lot of it is sort of rests on whether the game master is sort of doing what's right. But that doesn't mean that not making mistakes. Sometimes DMs fumble through things and no one really knows what's going on. But as
Hmm.
long as the vibe is right, that everyone's sort of like committed to having a
Yeah.
good time with each other, it makes a big difference. And if you have a good experience, like what you're describing with these kids, I mean, that is the kind of thing that has enormous positive benefits, not
Yeah.
just in tabletop, honestly, but in life, in self-esteem, in developing understandings of creativity, and being able to visualize, and being able to understand spatial relations, and like on and on and on. So that's very cool that on the both sides of it, a very simple, group of kids, that wanted to play this, and their parents found out about you and hired you, all the
Yeah.
way up to the Critical Role level of the sort of the big time, right? That
Hmm.
sort of covers the gamut, it seems to me. But it's both legitimate. They're both tabletop play.
Oh yeah.
They're both related to what we talk about here all the time. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's cool.
And I place a lot of value, especially with the kids thing, is I place a lot of value in it because it's also some great social time for them. And for the weekly D&D program that we have in San Francisco too, of like these kids coming in. Sometimes I'm like,
Oh
wow, they keep coming in. This is great. They
yeah,
must
I
enjoy
mean,
it.
why
But then
wouldn't
I'm
they
like,
though?
well,
Yeah.
what's the rest of their week like? Like school, hanging out at home. I mean,
Yep.
if they hang out with their friends, I mean, I don't know how much kids even really do that much anymore nowadays. I mean, especially as they get older, being able to communicate, via phone call or text or Discord or
Yep.
whatever, or playing games
100%.
online, which is fine, but not the same. And
100%.
so, yeah, I have to remind myself from every now and then that, like just yesterday when I was sitting with some kids who came in for the San Francisco program, we had some siblings, we had a regular kid who'd been coming every single week, and we worked through different puzzles and problem solving. They got to decide things to do, and I'm like, wow, yeah, this was 2 hours of just pure social time with peers their age, and then me as the dungeon master and sort of a mentor, and
Yep.
so it's
Exactly. And
great.
that's important too. They get a mentor relationship with you. they get the imaginative, benefit of what Dungeons and Dragons does.
Yeah.
It creates all kinds of inspiration. I mean, I've never heard a compelling negative to it ever.
Yeah.
I've heard I could make, and you and I both play a fair number of video games. I could
Mhm.
make an argument that like staring at screens or whatever has its own problem, and obviously with streaming, you do a
Yeah.
we're staring at a screen right now,
Here we
so
are.
there's trade-offs, right? But having said
Mhm.
that, the I've never heard anyone really give me a legitimate reason as to why spending time with people in the active use of their imagination, in the building of story, in the understanding of working with the team, in the understanding of how math works. Like I just don't
Yeah.
I cannot see a drawback. I don't see
Hmm.
a negative to it as long again as you have people that are guiding it properly. So yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I mean, what a shock. You've all come to watch and listen to a DM show in which we're all like, it's great D&D. Have you tried But I mean it's just every time I hear stories like that, it reminds me of why this is such a great
Yeah.
thing to do. So that's cool.
We
That's
could,
cool. Well,
yeah.
that actually leads me, by the way, into my question that I was going to ask you.
Right.
And it's this is going to be interesting because mine is not retrospective in the same way.
All right.
So we've talked before on here about are there subjects or things like that that you are willing to tackle or not tackle in your DMing? But I
Hmm.
thought quite a bit about your answer to one of these, and I don't remember what episode it was where we talked about that specifically. But you one of the things that you mentioned was you were like, well, I have to go along too, as someone who's being hired to DM, to think about what the players want specifically. How far can I push? Do I want to push anything? Because it's really a matter of like what the. So I want to ask you about it's retrospective in this sense. Oh, I didn't answer the second part of your question. It just struck me
No,
about what I learned. Well, I'm going to fold
we
it into
can,
this
we
one.
can,
Yeah,
yeah, we can come
that's fine.
back
I'm
to
going to
it.
fold into this
Mhm.
because what I wanted to ask you was over the course of maybe this year or the last 2 years, let's say,
Mhm.
I'm curious if you have begun to discover certain themes that you are bringing forward in the games that you dungeon master. And here's what I mean
Mm.
by that. Obviously, stories will dictate certain aspects of themes. And if you're running Rime of the Frost Maiden, which I know you've done before,
Yeah.
that's going to have a certain kind of feel and tone, and it's going to present certain aspects of survival and, man against the elements and all that. Like there's certain themes there that come through, as
Yeah.
opposed to Curse of Strahd, as opposed to one of these other deals. But in a homebrew, and I know you've run a lot of those as well, in a homebrew environment, that's also got to present something different. So I'm wondering about, have you come to find that there are patterns in the questions that you ask your players to answer, in the themes that you present within the adventures that your players play?
Mm.
Are there common elements? Because I've started to notice that there are some of those elements that appear a little bit in my own DMing, and I
Hmm.
don't mean those as like overwhelming, do this, or like I'm not talking about railroading. We've talked about that at length. I'm talking about, are there patterns of things that have come up within the process of your world building, your story development, and so on,
Yeah.
that has felt similar from campaign to campaign? And I'm curious if you've learned anything over the last couple of years about that, or has it just been completely different experience every time, and there's no similarities? I'm wondering about the themes that come up in your DMing work.
Yeah. I find myself looking back through, I keep all of my notes for my campaigns in one
Copious
folder.
notes.
Copious
Copious.
notes, honestly. Yeah, I'm looking at my visual folder of all 78 sessions of Strixhaven right now. And the app I use gives me like little visual, as if the pages are displayed from 1 to 78 out right now, and I can click on any of one of them.
Mhm.
But just to remind myself. But I think the first thing that comes to mind would be, I think for the last year at least, or the last 2 years, I've been very interested in when villains come to the forefront and are the antagonist in the story, making giving them depth and having their villainy be, I don't want to say justified, but understood
Yes,
or
100%.
understandable,
100%.
Um, and so I have done that in, the big bads of like the Strixhaven campaign, or even just one shots. I oh yeah, so a big example of that is a one shot that has kind of started to become my secondary one shot that I run in case my primary one shot is for some reason not available, or I don't can't run it, or I recently had a thing where a client hired me a second time to run a one shot,
Ah,
but with
can't
different
run the same
people.
one
So I
shot.
was like, can't run the same one for
Yeah.
that guy. So I've have one that I've been running now that I created while I was in Hawaii on a family vacation that I ran for my family. And so it's sort of tropical themed and like has some Hawaiian elements to it. But the concept of it is that there is a I guess this will be spoilers for if this ever this might become a module someday,
If
or
you,
if
I
you
was gonna
ever
say,
hire
if you
me.
play
Yeah,
Zach's one shot, you have
yeah,
to
if
please
you
skip
hire me
forward.
for, yeah, I think it'll be okay though, because likely this is, again, this is my secondary one shot. So if you hire me for a game, it likely won't be this story.
Don't hire
Um,
Zach again, or
yeah,
otherwise
don't
he'll
hire
run
me.
this. He's one and
um,
done. Zach is your one shot
yes,
DM.
yeah, but I guess to summarize as briefly as I can, the one shot involves going to an island where a there are native people that live there, and their council of elders has recently they went out to a neighboring island to go make first contact with a group of people that they realized were on that island. They thought that island neighboring them was uninhabited. They found out through something called the Oracle Stone, which is at the top of the mountain on their island. They touched the stone. They were like, "Oh, the stone has told us there are other people on this island and that we should contact them." So this council of elders goes out by a ship to go meet these strange new people, and all that comes back from their voyage is the ship's wreckage.
Oh,
And so the adventurers are hired not to investigate the wreckage of the ship, but to go up to the Oracle Stone, because only the Council of Elders is permitted. But because the Council of Elders is dead, no one else in the village can go. But technically, these adventurers aren't from there. So the adventurers are hired to go up, trek up the mountain, and ask the Oracle Stone what truly happened to the Council of Elders, because there is a war hero among the villagers who wants to bring war to the neighboring island. He is convinced that the people that we were supposed to make first contact with killed our council of elders, and he wants to take a warship as the next ship to send and
ah,
attack them. And this guy is a war hero because one of the things that resides on this island is a phoenix that is sort of born every maybe 50 to 100 years, and every time it's arrived it's attacked and nearly burned away the entire island. And this war hero, when he was a child, when he was a boy, he single-handedly struck the phoenix in the breast with a spear and killed it. And so ever since, for the last 50 years, he has been kind of like defending this village. So you have kind of have these factions of like, the last remaining elder who's hired the adventurers to go up to the Oracle Stone, see what really happened, versus this war hero, this general who's like preparing his group of archers, his troops, to
okay,
go march
okay.
out and bring war,
I
right?
like the setup. Yep.
Okay. So, then there's sort of a role play section. They go out, they meet, they talk to the general, they get his disposition. He's a friendly guy. He's sort of Klingon like. He challenges one of the players to an arm wrestle. So
I like
he
that you start out with he's a friendly guy. He's kind of Klingon like
yeah, just take those two
he's
things
a
and
good
put them
dude.
in a
He's sort of like
blender.
Lex
Like,
Luthor.
yeah, they're okay. Well, all right, all right. Well, I guess what I'm saying that I'm thinking fondly of Worf
Oh
when I
yeah, no,
say
no,
that,
I
I
get it.
guess.
No, for sure. I just it's
But
like
anyway, so they meet the different kind of some villagers, and of course they all have different opinions about everything. And
right.
the village has been trained by this general to be fantastic archers and everything. And but anyway, and the adventurers are encouraged to hide the fact that they're going up to the Oracle Stone from the general, because the general does not want, he just wants to go to war. He doesn't want there to
Okay.
be any delay.
Okay.
They go up to the stone, and the phoenix is reborn. The phoenix is reborn at the top of the mountain. The mountain's kind of a volcano. And so they find out the sort of like twist and the end of this one shot, and leading back into the themes that have been recurrent for me in my games, is that the phoenix is reborn, but right as they go to the Oracle Stone, they ask what really happened. And the stone shows them a vision that the ship, that carried the elders, blew up from the inside. It was sabotaged by someone from the village,
The war hero?
maybe.
Mm,
And if they had investigated, then they could piece together that
okay.
yes, it was actually the war hero who sabotaged the ship because all he wanted to do was war. And then they found
Wanted a
out this other
pretext
thing. And
for, yep, yep, yep.
yes,
Hmm.
the Phoenix is then reborn. And they're like, oh my God, this is the boss fight of the one shot. We're going to go fight the Phoenix. Then we're going to go back down to the village and be like, hey, look, it was someone from inside. And then that'll be the end. The Phoenix, drops down in front of them, all boss fight like. And then it's like, hello, I don't know who I am. Are you? Hello, who are you? And they heard the story of the Phoenix. Every time it arrived, it would announce its name in a great bellowing voice and soar down the mountain with great wings of flame, burning everything in its path and declaring that it would create a lava lake out of the island itself. But when this Phoenix arrives, it's sort of aloof and friendly.
Hmm.
Um, and so there's a bit of confusion there, and they kind of look out over from the top of the mountain down over the village, and the Phoenix is like, I wonder if I can, maybe this new life can be the same. But the Phoenix also expresses that it's kind of missing something. It feels sort of weak or sick for some reason. And then suddenly the Phoenix collects all the adventurers and swoops them in with its wings to protect them from something. And when the Phoenix pulls its wings away, its whole back is peppered with arrows, as the general has seen the Phoenix at the top of the mountain and ordered his archers to shoot the Phoenix.
Hmm.
And the Phoenix, the last thing it can do is protect the adventurers, as essentially this war hero general continues shooting volleys of arrows at the Phoenix at the top of the mountain to kill it. The Phoenix ferries the adventurers down as its last act down to the village itself. And this is where they find out that the general has now fully sort of cracked. And what they realize is that when this war hero was a child and when he killed the Phoenix 50 years ago, the Phoenix, its anger and its spirit and its resentment then entered into him. And
Ah,
he is truly the Phoenix itself.
ah,
And this is why he's warmongery, why he immediately wants to go to the island. And so what sort
that's
of
cool.
happens is the final boss fight is him.
That's cool.
Um, and then he declares, I am Ahi Kai. I will turn this island into fire and flame, or
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
he says. And so they fight the war hero. Then there's the decision. And this is sort of getting into the theme of like, okay, do you try to fight him in a way that will remove this baleful, angry, tyrannical Phoenix spirit from him
Yeah.
and save the war hero, or will you do the easier thing and just kill him? And then, will the Phoenix be reborn again? There was this strange thing where the Phoenix was partially reborn, but it was nice, and then the mean part was in the general.
Hmm.
So, sort of what that I guess capitulates is this idea of like trying to craft really complex villains. I think I've um, become very fond of that from watching different media and movies and things like that that have really developed antagonists, and trying to create some of those too. Because yeah, I think it is fun from time to time to just have a mustache twirling pure evil demon that's trying to destroy the world or whatever. But um, I like to give them a bit of backstory, and especially if this is supposed to be a direct antagonist to the players
Yeah.
too. If it's a campaign, you want an antagonist who is literally an antagonist to the protagonist element of your
Right.
players.
Right.
So yeah, I would say that's a theme for me, and one that I'm going to keep in mind for 2025. I have a different goal for this next year as far as things I want to learn and change with my GMing. But yeah, I would say that that's my big thing is giving care and credence to villains. And even when I run for kids, I tend not to do intense, bloody, gory combats or villains that are. I even stray away from doing human villains at all, and mostly just stick to like if they're going to fight something, it's like a shadow demon
Right,
or
right, right.
an ooze or things like that, or giant insect. But even then, I try to give them a bit of story to it. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I would say that was it. Is this year a common theme has been that whenever villains come up or the heroes are supposed to fight something, I want them to think about it, whether that's the complex backstory of the villain, and then like whether to simply apprehend them or to slay them, or if they're just coming across a group of goblins,
Right.
and do we
Right.
just kill goblins, or can we come to a deal, or how much of it is them being goblins versus this particular group of goblins,
Right.
so
Right.
yeah, that's been a big theme, I would guess, between all my different games. And you said that you noticed some sort of recurring themes, which I find actually, frankly, more surprising because you run so many different kinds of games, and some of which are written, in the particular case of Expedition, is sort of not even written by you, um,
Right.
to a certain degree.
Um,
So
I was gonna say, so,
yeah,
somewhat. No,
somewhat.
no,
So
that's
I'm
true.
curious, what elements that you found you bring specifically to your games across
I
all of them.
think, well, I think that was a good one. That sounds like a really awesome one shot. Also, I think the thing that I was thinking about when I asked this question was relating to themes that appear, that sort of come out of sessions that are played, and are there sort of
Mm,
commonalities among those?
mhm.
And so, one of the things that I've begun to notice in the last year in particular is, and the thing that kind of sort of cohered this for me was, I don't know if you've had a chance to watch the Secret Level D&D episode
Of
on
course,
Amazon
yeah,
Prime Video. Okay, so first of all, I should say, if anyone has Prime Video, you should go watch that. It's
yeah. It was
very,
great.
very well done.
Hmm.
It is a little creepy. There's a couple of really disturbing moments, but it is like, I think it's dynamite in terms of like what it shows Dungeons and Dragons can do.
Hmm.
But one of the themes that comes out there is, how do we construct a group of people to work together? Like, how do we
Hmm.
do that, right? The expectation that we've always had in Dungeons and Dragons is a group activity. So for the most part, most campaigns, my Beowulf campaign is just one player, but even there, you have a group of followers that are provided for in the rules that accompany the person. So it's like, it's very rare to have a single solo, one person only, nobody else around. D&D generally is a social activity, and you have multiple characters involved. And so there's just this expectation, like, and then we all work together, and like, what does that mean? But to me, the thing that's been very interesting is watching in each of my campaigns, especially over the past year, how those groups, despite wildly different personalities in certain cases, despite wildly different backstories, different aspects of what they value and why things matter and who they're about, how those groups are brought together. Like, what causes those people to commit to each other? Because it isn't just always, well, we're all here in a group, so we better do it. Like, learning what it is that brought them together is really important. And I want to give a little bit of advice here before I go on to explain a bit of that theme. And the advice I want to give everyone is to be thinking about that as a good dungeon master or a game master. One of the things that we always talk about, the idea of asking your players how, aspects of their backstory. How did you get to be the person you are? What did you pursue, right? One of the things that I think is most important is, how did you get to know the other people in your group? What is it that holds you together with them? If you do not provide that, if that's not something specified in your one shot or specified in your campaign, that's something that you want the players thinking of from the get go. And the reason is that you want those people to understand what it means to function together, despite frustrations, despite disagreements, despite asymmetries in terms of commitment to various causes. You want to be able to know, how do I get those people together to work collectively in a team? In popular culture, you see this with the Avengers, right? The MCU assembles this group of like absolute misfits, like that are just all over the place and really do not get along. From the point of view of straight personality, Tony Stark is wildly different than Steve Rogers, right? Like,
Yeah.
they could not be more differently opposed in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
except fundamentally, what holds them together is there is a moral core about each of them, about the importance of fighting for those that they love, and fighting for the the things that they value. And the fact that over time they come to realize that each of them have something to teach each other about that process. Most
Hmm.
memorably, Tony Stark learning the reasons for sacrifice from someone like Captain America, right? Even though this is someone that on some level he can't stand. But if you look at the big two of that, it's really Captain America and Iron Man are your two basic tent poles of that group.
Yeah.
And so it's about how do you assemble a team. So the thing that I was thinking about was in every one of my campaigns, watching that question be answered has been fascinating. In the Eberron campaign, what has brought that group together has largely been that from the very beginning, they were part of what was known as the King's Citadel, this special forces group that does the job no one else can do. And having them have this group from the very beginning was helpful to make it understand why they were working together in common cause, but not necessarily what it was that would commit them to each other. Two of them were sisters, so they loved each other from the very beginning. One of them was from another house who was kind of an engineer, artificer type. That's the character that Tren plays. One of them is a Starforged who's kind of an outsider character in a way, a variant Warforged who's not really like is comes to the group and does work for the King's Citadel, but is clearly not someone who is related either by mortality or by particular species or anything to any of the others there. And then you have the character played by Brandon O'Brien, who came in a little bit later. His character, Rowan Shallow, is this wild magic sorcerer who was always a scoundrel. He has a metal gun arm. He was always kind of a scoundrel, a guy who plays poker for a living type of thing, and then always
Hmm.
and ran into people who one of whom Trendane's character had made the arm for him. That was the connection there, but
Mm.
ended up falling in with them and ended up becoming a character that is willing to sacrifice for them, partially because at a certain point he feels like they're just hopelessly naive. Like they're just like, come on, man, like you can't actually believe this stuff. And yet there is something about the raw determination that they possess to push forward, and to do so not because it benefits them directly, but because it is for the good of the nation, of the continent, of the world, that he's kind of like, oh, and even if he doesn't become, oh, therefore I'm Superman, all that needs to matter is that he's found a group of people who are consistent. And because they're consistent, he's like, I need some consistency and not the randomness of my existence that always leads me in the same direction. Like fascinating stuff, right? So
Wow.
there's that. And then there's your group, Expedition, in which two members have recently been pulled away because of real life circumstances. And so two other people have come in.
Hmm.
What is going to assemble that team? And it struck me in the last couple of sessions, we had another example of what brought you together was a common enemy. But then what has kept you together to this point is the fact that two of you came down here in the first place for a mission. One sort of has been brought here, doesn't know who to trust, and is going to rely on the people that healed her once already, like until she can figure out what's going on. And then
Yeah.
the last one is like studying for exams and figures this has to be part of the test and is sort
Yeah.
of being brought together. Those elements over time will cohere, where you will see people connect together. Gamork, the direwolf NPC in that
Mm.
campaign, that especially Toya's character Knowles has really bonded with. I didn't know that that was going to become a prominent part of that group, and yet
Yeah.
became this thing that when Gamork went down in our last combat, everyone, at least the two of you are like, like he said, not Gamork, right?
Yeah.
Like there was just something powerful about the assembly of these people who were brought together by common circumstance and a recognition that they, unlike so many crazy people around them, are committed to each other. So I
Mm.
have found increasingly a theme of almost small communities, families, what brings people together as a family, what brings people together to fight for each other has been an increasing theme, which frankly, now maybe this is just my brain
Mm.
self-selecting, boy, do we need that in the world right now. Do we need a whole lot of community focus of figuring out what's going to bring us together over what's going to rip us apart, figuring out how we fight for each other, how do we broaden that community? These are all things that one can learn, I think, when it's done on a micro level and when it's done on a tabletop level. So I have been, and my Buy the Dice Roll group does this as well. So I've just been fascinated to see how each of those groups have sort of come together to form a family, to form a group, and what that sort of means for the implications of the stories that I then tell. Because if they lose one of those family members, that's going to hurt a lot, and there's going to be a lot at stake for them beyond just, oh, we lost our, fighter, cleric, like mechanically, how do we replace that? This is going to be very much a, what do we do now that we lost this person that we love? How do we fill that gap? Can we even do so? So that is just fascinating to me. So that has been a theme that I've noticed quite a bit, is about the construction of families and how we form groups together.
Yeah,
So
that,
that's
that reminds me of something that that our mutual friend Carlos Hernandez once said, which was that the damage, or I think here I recorded
Oh,
this
you have this in your
down.
notes? Oh
I
my
have this
God.
in my
You
notes.
know,
I don't want to butcher it.
I
I
have a
don't
pretty
want to
good
butcher it.
memory, but these notes,
Let me
man.
just Control F Carlos. There we go. Okay. Oh, I have two Carlos quotes.
Oh wow. Okay.
Anyway, so Carlos Hernandez once said, "The wounds hurt more because of the role play. The healing matters more because of the role play." And what
Yes.
that makes me think
Yes.
of is,
Yes. Yes.
as you're talking about mechanics versus role play and things like that, it's like
Absolutely.
D&D is almost becoming a way for us to love and be human in within the sphere of this fantasy world and this story that we're telling, and then suddenly casting a first level healing word really matters in a
It's
certain
an act of
situation.
love in that sense.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that's amazing.
Maybe
um
this is a metaphor for
yeah,
life, people.
maybe
Just saying.
maybe it is.
Guess
I
what? We've
would,
been fooling you.
yeah, I guess so. Hearing, I misunderstood your question after all that. So I think, as talking about emergent themes through what I've
No,
been
but yours
running.
was good too.
Yeah, yeah, as a different interpretation of
It's
what you're
fine.
asking, but I think, yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I don't. I think I've run, everything from this regular Monday thing for Strixhaven to lots of games for kids, and I don't know. I think obviously that same element of like togetherness, but also finding a reason to work together and to be together. um but I think right now, I mean, I'd have to put some thought to it, but what really comes to mind in my experience is, aside from Strixhaven, which I could talk about at length, um all my other games are tend to be one shots or like isolated non-linear games. And so oftentimes my greatest commitment or greatest priority in those moments is ensuring that the group as people gel together and doing what I can do in that case then.
For sure. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes,
So
yes.
that's what's coming to mind right now, is I'm like, huh, are there any emergent themes? But then I'm like thinking back on like all these games, insert random Sunday with totally new group of kids who have never played together, or even the kids who I've run for at the different parents' houses and
Right,
so on.
right.
No, I thinking back on each of those in my head every time, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna make sure, oh, this person hasn't gotten the spotlight. Hey, this NPC. Da, da, da,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
da.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
It's
I
fair because
think
the campaigns that I'm talking about are longer running, so
right,
like
right.
they have longer time. Although,
And
I mean, I will say that like one thing to sort of fit in what you had asked about the what I want to get better at this year relative to
mhm,
this theme question, one thing that I want to get better and I at over the course of the next year um is being able to, well, one, recognizing something about myself as a DM, which I'll come back to. Two, having recognized that thing,
mhm,
figuring out a way to make it so that the players can invest within something where they have the agency to make the decisions that they make. And I would not take that away, but to recognize that the parameters they're doing that in, at least moral parameters, that's a little overwrought maybe, but like the thematic parameters are things which I've kind of established, being better at figuring out how to sort of square that circle. Because what I have learned about myself as a DM is that I like stories like that. I like stories in which people come together for common purpose. I don't actually care what that purpose is, right? I mean, so long as it's not destroy the world and hellfire. Like, I mean, I don't love evil campaigns. That's why I don't run them. But I
mhm,
don't particularly care if they're like, we come together and we're like a ragtag band of thieves, and it's all blades in the dark, and we're like one step ahead of the law, but we're doing it for each other. That's cool. Like, I'm totally down with that.
yeah.
Or if it's let's save the world from Tiamat, like Tyranny of Dragons, right? That again is its own sort of thing. But I do love the idea of stories in which people come together for common purpose and find individual expression through that common purpose. So
Mm,
they express themselves as the purpose is also maintained. So it's not
yes.
just, I'm a soldier. Like, I'm not interested in running a bunch of campaigns where everyone just salutes, right? I'm interested in campaigns where everyone with rough edges and some and everything else butts up against each other and there's all this stuff, but they are
Hmm.
more or less trying to pull in the same direction while still expressing who they are as personalities. Again, that's the Avengers MCU thing I was talking about.
Yeah.
And I've learned that as a GM, I really like those kinds of stories. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to I can't shoehorn that, right? Like, I'm not going to go, listen, there wasn't enough working together, okay, today. Like, I'm not going to do that. But I think I've recognized about myself that as a DM, that those are campaigns and those are stories that I think not only I enjoy, but I think the overwhelming majority of audience members really appreciate that idea of people coming together for common purpose, because friendship, found family is essentially universal. Like, I don't know anyone that's not like, yeah, I don't care about friends or family, basically. Like, even introverts, even the most introverted person has
Yeah.
someone in their life that matters to them that they care about.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a theme that I like watching explored within my games. And again, I'm trying to be really careful here because I don't mean on a session to session level, I'm like taking, keeping a check mark box or anything like that. It's just I see people doing that almost naturally as like a center of gravity. And
Mm.
I think I've realized over time that I really love that, at
And
watching that happen in all of its multifaceted ways, in
yeah.
so many different ways. People do come together somehow to solve these common problems, however that turns out to be solved. And that
Yeah.
is very cool to me. So I want to get better at knowing how to encourage that sort of thing
Yes.
without pushing it, in some heavy-handed way. So
It's almost like that is the universal desire of every D&D game. Like if you were to somehow find a way to strip away all the wallpaper and everything and get down to the fundamental thing,
yeah.
like people just want to be together and have
Yes, really.
an experience together.
Really.
Um,
And it
and
brings them
so
together, and it brings them together in ways, right, that are not the same ways. It's not,
yes.
we don't commonly watch a movie. Like, that's cool. You want to go watch a movie, that's totally fine.
Hmm.
But it's not the same as I just made an interaction with you as a character. The
Hmm.
interaction I made with you as a character is underpinned by the fact that you and I are friends in real life, and we know what it means to say something like this, even
Hmm.
in, right? That sort of dynamic, which is stuff that I may not even be privy to, you and I may not be privy to as
Right.
GMs. But if we
Yeah.
see it in our players, if we see that our players want to connect with each other, like, that's mind blowing to me when I see it
Yeah.
happen. And it happens over and over again in the best campaigns, where you see that connection, where they themselves are working out this stuff so that they draw closer together as people. And that, I mean, what else
Yeah.
could, I mean, how could anyone do anything better in a way? So,
That's pretty great.
yeah.
And when you were saying as well, brought together for a common purpose, but then each person and each character is approaching that purpose from a different way and kind of each bringing their own thing to it. Thinking about the MCU, because that's a great visual and thematic reference, I'm brought to when I think in Infinity War, when all a group of the Avengers are on some planet or something. It's when they face Thanos out on that planet, and when well, spoilers for the MCU, end of the MCU, phase 2 or whatever it was. But in the same way that, like, obviously they're all fighting against Thanos for the reason of, like, he's going to destroy half of all people, but also, like, they're each a part of the Avengers and they're each taking up this role for different reasons. Iron Man's reason for defending the world is much different than Captain America's, and their
Very much
perspectives
so.
on that have been shaped and changed because of Civil War and so on.
Yep.
But I'm brought to that moment on the planet where it's like they're also each approaching the purpose with their own capabilities and their own ideas as well. So, like, I recently saw a clip again of, like, Iron Man has spent all of his money, his tech, his everything. He fights Thanos on that planet by creating a special piece of tech that will create a glove that will keep his fingers closed so that he cannot use the Infinity Gauntlet. Like, Iron Man shoots out nanites that will keep Thanos's hand closed, and he goes, like, to open them, but it's like one of those, like, pressure finger things, and he can't open his hand. Meanwhile, like, later in that same on that same planet, Doctor Strange is siphoning or filtering through a million different futures, to see the possibilities. So it's like every character is approaching the problem from a different angle, but they all want to try to solve it.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the link too of like after that strange, determining that there's only one path to winning, and then later in the next movie showing that same finger of one possibility to Iron Man and so on. So yeah, I think the common points in all stories, and like the moments of togetherness and like teamwork and everything, Captain America lifting Thor's hammer is cool, not just because it's Captain America lifting this powerful artifact, but because the powerful artifact is used by another character, and that represents their bond. And
And is worthy of it, and
yes,
in a way
yeah.
that one might not have expected, because that was the whole purpose of it. Yeah, I mean, and there's numerous other examples of this. Obviously, Star Wars does this.
Hmm.
I mean, Lord of the Rings.
Of course.
People that are brought together
Oh yeah, Fellowship.
through common desire to do the right thing, but obviously express it in wildly different ways. Yeah, it's just it sort of, I think, fits the sort of dynamic of what tabletop play is at its best. And it's why when you read sort of, and this is a bit of advice for folks, I think, when you read stuff from people about well, and then like they so and so wouldn't go along with the adventure because they said that's not what my character would do. And you have a bunch of people being like, well, if that's not what your character would do, then you're not welcome at my table. And like, that's true, but I would phrase it differently, which is like, would your character really spend their time existing on an island, emotionally? Would they really want to be in a situation where no one would identify with them, no one would connect with them, no one would desire to be involved or engaged in any way with them, because they are themselves this abstract random, I just do what I want whenever I want, and blah 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 blah. Like, that sort of character doesn't usually become a character that people spend a lot of time around, because they are exhausting and because they are impossible to sort of connect with any other path other than their own.
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't think that's usually it. I think the way to do it is to sort of address it again thematically, and to talk a little bit about finding individual expression through common purpose. And we just went through three massive popular culture examples where that's done in the
Yeah.
MCU, in Star Wars, in Fellowship of the Ring, and Lord of the Rings. And there are many other examples of this also, where you bring people together for common purpose. And even the individual hero stories, even the Mad Maxes of the world, find greatest expression when Mad Max is driving the tanker for the people because he needs to let the town escape. The only decision that he makes that's a different decision than any other bad guy would make, but that's the decision that matters because he was the only one who would do that. Even the anti-hero stories at some point involve deciding that they are more fully expressed with someone else involved than just on their own on an island. And that's really powerful stuff, I think, for story, and it's powerful stuff for tabletop play. And it really helps the players feel connected to each other. And that just provides more rich storytelling. Also, another side benefit, it means that when there's downtime for their character, they're interested in it. Like we did
Yeah.
for Expedition, we did a little bit of these little vignettes for Zach and company, specifically for the two new characters that came in, these little individual
Yeah, those
vignettes
were
that
good.
explained how they were brought into this universe. One of the reasons I did that is that I knew that Toya and Zach would be interested to find out a little bit about these characters,
Yeah.
and are interested in it precisely because they have all had their individual moments of, wow, what is it going to be like for Jaraxxus to learn that he is an influencer that doesn't have an audience right now? What's the
Yeah.
impact of that? Is he always going to do that? Nal's Darkly, who lives within the context of her dreams, what is that going to be like? Like, there are just, everyone gets their chance to shine, but everyone coheres ultimately to this common purpose of not just survival, but being able to figure out sort of the larger impact of the world on which this takes place. So it just means that people, even when their characters are not on stage, still feel invested in other people because they are collectively engaged in this process. And part of that is learning about what the individuals are doing to make that happen, even when they're not the individual doing it at that
Yeah.
moment.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah. That's perfect. I forgot what the question was that you asked. I think we've answered it at this point.
I think probably. Well,
It was a
yeah.
recurring themes. Yeah, yeah.
Recurring themes, and I think you've sort of, yeah, I think you've sort of expressed some of that, I think,
Yeah, yeah.
in what it is that you've represented. Yeah, I think that there's a lot there that can be done thematically. So
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, you and I guess to round us out, you talked about as far as like goals for 2025 of your GMing. I mean, obviously we have like production goals of 2025 as far as shows and
We do,
things we want to
yes.
do. But as far as like you and your GMing style, I think you mentioned, finding leaning more into this aspect of togetherness and united purpose and how a ragtag group of people finds common purpose and bonds together. Is that sort of one of your big goals
One
for
of my
this
big
next
goals
year?
is to learn how to do that, is to lean into that while still preserving the individual agency
Right.
needed to make it, first of all, something the players want to do, and second of all, something that will make that theme I just discussed matter. Because again, if it's just people doing things for common purpose, that's a war story theoretically, and I'm not interested in just telling stories where we have everyone serves the U.S. Army and salutes, right? Like I'm not interested in that. So having people who are individuals, but
Hmm.
individuals who find in their expression that they can advance common purpose in some way. That's something I want to become better at being able to do. And a lot of that is just continuing to work. I think I'm good at this already, but continuing
Yeah.
to really develop listening, really trying to listen to my players, really trying to listen to the things that they are drifting towards and trying to yes and that as much as I can, right? Like
Yeah.
trying to kind of shape around that a little bit so that the world is reflective of their choices because like you know, the world can be reflective of their choices. We've talked about this on a show previously. And it doesn't mean it becomes a narcissistic exercise where the only thing that ever matters is what they do. Like the world does what it does, and people are going to make the choices that they make, but the choices that they make do shape the way they experience the world.
Hmm.
So that's really the way to avoid railroading, honestly, is to make sure that you are letting the players experience like choices shape the way that they perceive the experience of the world around them. And you do that by giving them consequences, we've discussed before. You do that by describing the fact that the world is moving on, even when they're not moving within it. So if they just like abandon ship and go off to an island for 6 months, like the world's not going to stop and wait, like it's going to keep doing what it
Yeah.
does. But also honoring the fact that they are working towards something and following them down that line the best I can because the more that I'm able to do that as a DM, the more invested I think the players will feel, but the more that everybody will get what they're hoping for, which is exploration of what I was talking about in terms of that theme, but also everyone feeling as if they have changed. I'd love everyone to come out of
Yeah.
a campaign feeling changed in some way by it,
Yeah.
by something about it, by something they gained from it. So learning how to listen as much as I can and keep working on listening is a big part of
Yep.
uh, of stuff. So
Yeah. That's great. I need to do more of the same too. And I think for me, as far as next year, I think one of the the benefits and disadvantages of running games professionally and running one shot so often and uh, running the same one shot all the time or running with kids and kind of leaning into the same tropes or the same gags and silly things to make the kids laugh or to get them invested in the game. Almost every week we get a kid who's never played before, and so a lot of it has been me um, trying to perfect what I've already done. But I think now I've reached the point where I want to shift my paradigm back a little bit more and to bring in some new things.
yeah.
Something I've realized over this past year that I want to work on for next year is D&D. Some of the funnest parts of D&D is the combat. And there are lots of ways, of course, that you can make combat interesting and not just like, okay, I attack the goblin and then the goblin attacks me. You can involve other stakes. It doesn't have to be life or death. You could be doing a duel that is, meaningful for your culture. You could be fighting an animated object. There's quirky ways that you can make combat interesting and fun.
Right.
But especially running for kids, I found that like there's situations where, I just yesterday I improvised a scenario where they were hiking out in the middle of a forest and told for this quest to investigate strange metal metallic noises coming from the forest, which everyone was staying away from because a forest is full of trees and greenery and plants and metal noises are scary.
Yeah.
No one wanted to investigate them. So they go there, I put some NPCs who were camping nearby who were afraid to advance because of the noise and were about to head back. Talk with the NPCs for a bit, and then they find out that the sound as they go to it is the hidden vault entrance to an ancient thieves guild, and something is trying to escape from the metal door, the hatch
Oh,
to
great.
it.
I'm sure that's
They
fun.
open the hatch, and I was like, okay, what creature should come out? And I was like looking at the tokens and things that I had too, and also keeping in mind, like, I try with young kids not to run human enemies or things that are, would involve blood or murder or things like that. So oozes, or if it is going to be a beast, it's going to be an insect or a spider or something
Hmm.
like that. And sometimes what I can lean into is like shadow creatures or amorphous mists or
Right,
things
right.
like that. And then too, I can just say, oh, this is just like a pure personification of darkness, and like they don't have to worry then about any moral implications of fighting such a thing. Although there are appropriate situations to involve moral implications, and in fact, I think you should with kids. But for this particular combat, a shadow creature that I described as like fog but shadowy comes out of the Thieves Guild and they fight it.
Okay.
But then my experience yesterday was that they were all kind of scared. And I was like, oh, and I leaned in the opposite direction, sensing that made it, I had the NPC run up to help them, the one who was in the camp who initially was scared. But then I was like, then a shadow creature comes out, and they were all kind of like hesitant about combat. And they were like, we're going to die. And I'm like, no, no, guys, you're supposed to be heroic. Take down this evil creature. Take it down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're like, I rolled a 3 for my initiative. We're going to die. They're all like looking at each other, freaking out. I'm like, it's okay. So I had the lizard folk camp guy come up, and he's like heroic and goofy, and he charges right up to it. But of course, the shadow creature crits on him, and he goes down, and he's making death saving throws. And then, of course, the heroes all
They're
come
like,
together, and
we're
they're
gonna
like,
lose lizard
yeah,
guy.
yeah. So
No.
then they come together to save him. But then, as that finished, I guess getting to my point, I was like, man, even then, it didn't really seem like that's what they wanted to do. Like, thinking back on it, there's one particular girl, for example. This was sort of her first couple times playing, and she rolled pretty badly on her. I had everyone make a perception check to investigate the area because everyone likes rolling dice. So I'd give a couple session opportunities where everyone just rolls a die
Yeah,
because
yeah,
why
yeah.
not? Although I don't tell them that. And she rolled really badly. So the way that we collaborated and explained it is that she got diverted by a set of tracks on their hike, and she went to go investigate them. And I did a little side vignette with her just because of this bad roll. Where I was like, okay, you follow these tracks that don't lead to your quest, but you find a panther that is drinking water from a pond with a waterfall. And she's like, oh, I want to befriend it. I want to, can it be my pet? And so she makes an animal handling check, and I ask her to describe how she does it. And then thinking back on the session, and that same young lady, that same girl, who's like only 9 or 10, thinking back on the combat, like she was one of the most scared ones where it's like, yeah, when the lizard came in, that whole thing happened. She helped, and she helped to fight it. But I am almost 100% sure her favorite part of the session was befriending the random panther that was
Sure,
just a little side
sure,
thing, you
sure.
know? So I'm like, man, I think for some of the kids, for different tables, fighting shadow creatures and getting to cast firebolt and rolling their math rocks, as they like to call them sometimes,
Yeah.
and rolling damage and seeing how much damage they can get. There are some players like that, but my overwhelming experience this year has been sometimes people just want to befriend a panther that's drinking water at a pond, and not have to fight anything. And sometimes I wonder too if D&D is even really the game that some of these kids want to play, or
Yeah.
like would be the best game. And there's, I mean, of course, especially with fifth edition, lots of ways you can permutate and homebrew D&D and run it without combat at all or things like that. But so anyway, that all to say, I think with you and your goal and your sights on listening more and trying to facilitate those player moments of collaboration
Yeah.
and letting them kind of work together, but then identifying those moments and things like that. I think my goal for this next year is to, um, I suppose, try to find scenarios that can be resolved without combat more, but be just as satisfying. That's a challenge to do, but I would say because again, one of the big awesome things about D&D is the mechanic satisfaction of combat, of
That's right.
casting your spells, rolling the dice, and things like that. But the same can be done with puzzles that are, you have to design them or,
Yes, indeed.
um,
Or thinking about social skills, and this is
mhm,
something we could talk about in a future show, but thinking about social skills and skill checks. Skill checks are very useful, and I don't think we do them enough. And using
yeah,
more skill checks to associate ourselves, like one of the favorite things I remember doing in a lot of RPGs is where I build my charisma. I love to make characters that are super charismatic and to see whether I can persuade people out of fighting me or persuade people out of doing things so I don't have to engage in combat at all.
mhm,
And the most memorable moments are a couple of games where I have been able to do exactly that. Well, D&D, frankly, ought to be more forgiving than a lot of video games would be to be able to do exactly that. So skill checks and things like that, to be able to give them a sense that you get the mechanical satisfaction. You are making checks and
yeah,
you are, even if you fail, failing forward, like all that different stuff about not having it be a dead end if they don't get something. But the mechanical satisfaction can come from something other than swinging a sword, shooting an arrow, shooting a spell, a combat spell. So learning how to do that, which I think actually in our expedition game is one of the things I like about Toya, because since Toya did not play a
yes,
lot of D&D
yes,
before, Toya is always thinking outside the box
yep,
for stuff like this, and that's really valuable, I think, because it gives
mhm,
us another way of looking at things. So anyway,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I think that's going to be one of my focuses of design this next year is I mean, maybe in a way like giving monsters social HP or something like that,
Yes.
or Blades in the Dark. I think is the game that has the clock system, is
Hmm.
what it's called, or maybe I'm thinking of something else. But where the GM will draw a circle on a piece of
And start a
paper and
clock. Yep.
then
Hmm.
start a clock, and or just like Citizen Sleeper. I think that's a better reference for me
Well,
because we
Citizen
played.
Sleeper, of course, is deeply inspired by Blades in the Dark and the clock
Yes,
system.
of
So
course,
yeah.
exactly.
So yep,
So,
for sure.
but essentially, the concept of having a pie, a pie chart that is slowly filled in. You can have two slices or three or four, and that represents the number of successes needed to accomplish something. And so, I think that's a design space that I'm going to try to iterate on within and in conjunction with D&D, where it's like, okay, if you don't have to fight this thing, and in fact, if you don't, like even just thinking yesterday, one of the other characters chose Shadow Druid as his subclass, and his first thing is like, oh, it's a shadow that came out of the hatch. Can I turn into my shadow form and see what it does? And so in my mind, I was like, well, people like combat, so we're going to get to combat anyway, but I'm going to give him like maybe the shadow thinks that this shadow druid's an ally, so he'll have that advantage over it.
Hmm. Hmm.
But thinking back on it, I'm like, man, it would have been just as fine to find a way for this shadow druid to like convince the shadow not to fight at all. And usually I would do that, but I think in this particular example, I was so focused on like the pillars of D&D being, let's get some combat in, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's not necessary, but
I agree, and I think it's moving away. Honestly, I think now you're not saying this, but I have heard so many people that don't, I think, know D&D as well as they think they do, that have just sort of been like, well, it's all from chainmail, so it's all a combat game, and I'm like,
yeah,
I don't think that's true anymore. I think that it is a significant portion of what people associate with it, and I do think that combat, especially when combat has a role play element to it, can be very valuable. I do not think it is necessary for Dungeons and
yeah,
Dragons to essentially require combat in every situation. And again, I would go back to, it doesn't just need to be either lots of dice rolling in combat or we just sit around and tell stories. You can
hmm,
have skill checks, ability checks, saving throws, and multiple iterations of that. Saving by a certain amount, succeeding by a certain amount. And you've seen a lot more of this even in official
yeah,
language now. If you make a skill check and they succeed by 5 or more, this happens, or 10 or more,
hmm,
this happens, or if they fail by 5 or more. I love that. Anything that creates more iterations of fail and success states that
yes,
allows you to move things around, I
yeah,
think is great. So, you know,
gosh,
but I think it's good information that you gave right there about learning from that. I don't know about a mistake, but learning from how your focus may be directed in a certain path. I'm sure
yeah,
they did have a good time. I'm sure if you
yeah,
asked
I
them, they
think they
probably
did.
wouldn't even know that,
Oh
but
yeah,
it's
no,
good for you to remember it, because it's something
yes,
that you can adjust for the next time. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, and kind of wrapping up here, but I think one thing that made me think of too that you said is like I've been reading through some one thing that 5e did is like, for example, in Tales of the Yawning Portal or Quests from the Infinite Staircase
Hmm.
are adventure books that
Yep.
came out that
Yep.
were essentially remasters of old adventures from the 80s, 90s, so on,
Yep.
and 70s or 60s even. And reading back through those, you know, in keeping with their original writing but updating it, sometimes the room descriptions in the dungeon is like, this room is empty aside from a gelatinous cube that resides inside, period. And that's the only description. There's no other flavor
You got
provided,
it.
there's nothing else.
You got it.
And so then I have this distinct memory of one of these books scrolling through it, and there's some dungeon that's like, in this room is a gelatinous cube. In this room, there are two goblins. In this room, there is a shadow creature. In this room, there is a mimic. So it's like the thought is, oh, they're just. It's almost like we're doing
Boss
a
rush or
darkest
something.
dungeon, yeah,
Or that,
boss
yeah.
rush,
And
yeah,
what's
you
the
know,
ecology of this place? Like, just like,
yeah,
what do
like
they
what's
feed the
going on?
gelatinous cube? Like, what?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you know, having then my job as the DM is like, okay, God, I'm gonna give a personality to each of these, of course, and fill out the world and breathe life into it. But yeah, I wish more of these modules were like, okay, here's a room with a scenario that, based on what we've written, actually should not resolve in combat if you run it right, you
Yes.
know.
Yes.
So I want to see more of that, and I want to create more of that as well, and have combat where it's meaningful, and have combat when the players want to do it and feel like it is the correct solution,
Right.
and
Right.
not just because of an arbitrary any arbitrary sort of thing. So
Yeah. No, amen to that for sure.
yep,
That's
great,
that's pretty cool.
and
Well, I will say, as we wrap up here, that I am going to thank my partner Zach here,
mhm,
because I have learned a great deal over the course of the last year from you.
yeah,
And I've really enjoyed this, and I hope that folks at home are getting that same enjoyment from watching, hopefully, both of us talk and give some advice and all that stuff. And but thank you, Zach, because it's been a pleasure doing this year.
no, of course, and the same to you. I think it's been for me. I feel like I'm still sort of turning the chapter into a new style of DMing and new experiences with DMing, and I mean, gosh, you've been playing D&D for about as long as I've been alive. So part of that
Well,
too
longer
has
than
been,
that.
honestly, I think, and so yeah, through all these episodes, kind of hearing the thing that I can always detect that is always apparent to me is just the flavor of wisdom within everything that you say, that I'm like, man, there's just something. He has great advice, he has great experiences, but man, every time he says something, I'm like, of course that's the way it is.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so no, it's been a great time for me too as well, like using this time to reflect on my own DMing experiences, and how I can improve and we can improve, and hopefully those of you listening and watching can improve, and two, like, if what you get out of this episode is a cool idea for your next game because of one sentence we said or one other thing, great,
That's
awesome.
exactly right. And then
If
please let us know that too. Like if
Yeah, yeah,
if you're like, hey, I saw this and I wanted to let you know, like we would love that stuff and we would
yeah, yeah.
certainly talk it up. And for the show, we're hoping, jokes aside about getting to 100 subscribers, I hope that we'll get there before the end of 2025. Yes. But jokes
Yes, I do
aside,
too.
we also, one of the goals that I have is I'm hoping that as we get more folks sort of interacting with us, where you're sending questions along for us to check out or whatever else,
Mhm.
because that also is great value as we build our little show that could here. So
The little
um,
show that could.
our little show that could.
Yes.
But happy New Year 2024 to Zach. Happy New Year
Hmm.
2024 to you, lovely folks. And Zach, I guess I'll see you next year, my
Yep.
friend.
I will see you next year. It's a long ways away, about a day.
So that was Zach.
Yes, and this was Greg.
And this was 2024 Gen GMs, and we will be back to you folks next year.
Hmm.
And until then, subscribe and spread the word, and
Yep.
we'll see you all soon.
See you next time.
Bye, everyone.